I'm here to talk to you about Amazon Transcribe. And I've also had the courtesy from Tony of being a guest. And so in the last few minutes, you'll get to hear about how Echo 360 is looking at some of these services. But how many of you have heard about Transcribe? Awesome. So you've been paying attention today. Thank you. One of the interesting things about Amazon Transcribe and the need for Amazon Transcribe is this session right here, right? If you were to listen to this session, you would take, so far, just about 30 minutes to have digested some of the content that's available to you. If you were to speed up that recording, you could get away with 15 minutes, although you'll hear some squirrels in the background. At the end of it, you're still investing a fair amount of time in trying to figure out what were these guys talking about, right? If you were to take the text from this session, get it, and run it through some kind of an NLP service, like maybe something called Amazon Comprehend, you'd be able to quickly see what was discussed, right? And in terms of the time that would take you, it would be minutes at best. It would be seconds, really, right? So this, I think, is the promise of these services when strung together. You can use Amazon Transcribe to unlock the insight, to get real value from audio and video content. You can use Amazon Translate to make those insights, to make that content available to a completely different set of audiences than have been before, right? Producing that content, the cost of getting that content in front of people is dramatically lowered because of the existence of some of these services. Now, when you take the time and the effort to engage the likes of Lionbridge, yes, you meet that high bar, but you get there so much faster, right? So essentially what we're saying is you've raised productivity, right? Now, when would you use Transcribe? Think about things like meetings. Think about sessions like this. Think about broadcast content. Think about social media content, like you saw Kashif's presentation earlier, right? In all those cases, the ability to string these services together and get meaning out of content is extremely valuable. And that's where the likes of Transcribe, as well as some of these other services, come together. So one of the important things is for you to understand fundamentally where in this stack Amazon Transcribe is positioned, right? So Amazon Transcribe is a fully managed, continuously trained service. What that means to you is that the service will consume both audio as well as video data without a lot of rendering, without a lot of transcoding before you prepare that content, right? We'll talk a little bit more about it. It will take it and it'll produce accurate transcripts that you'll see are time indexed so that you can get the most out of that transcription process. And it continues to improve over time. The idea is that the service essentially learns from the data that it has received so that the improvements are made available to you as users of the service, right? So let's talk about some of these features then, right? You can use both what is sampled at 16K or higher quality data. This is what you, for example, use when you're speaking to an Android device or an iOS device, or when you're talking to Alexa as an example, right? But you can also use a whole lot more of that 8K or telephony audio, data that has been in call centers and been archived for many, many years. If you had that archive on S3, for example, then you could take that data and run it through Amazon Transcribe for essentially pennies and be able to get a lot of that information, right? The timestamps and confidence scores tell you where the service knows that it has found something reasonable and where the service believes that it missed something, right? When two people are speaking to each other, just in a natural context, when, for example, I say, well, the letters are BDA, right? Did I say boy, David A? Did I say Delta, Delta A? It's confusing even to human beings, right? But then there are other gaps, things where there was a blip in the communication, things where there was a scratch, there was a paper being ruffled behind the scenes. Those are the kinds of things that can influence the transcription. And so it's important for the service to share the confidence level, and that way the human in the loop can go focus on the bits that are the most important, right? Let's take a look at these in a little more detail. So we talked a little bit about the fact that it's not just about format A or format B, right? It's here are the most typical formats that are used. without having to change that content. It's on S3, just send us a pointer to it, and the service can use it, right? Timestamping and confidence scores, like I said, allow you to see where the service thinks that it can use a human being to help get the accuracy higher, right? I believe that I've understood this correctly. So in this sentence, hi, I'd like to reschedule my flight to Seattle later tonight. In this case, you're seeing that at this part of the conversation, the term hi was used. At this part of the conversation, the term reschedule was used, right? And what that allows you to see is where in different parts of the conversation certain things are mentioned. So let's take a good example. You only talked about, for example, which particular languages Amazon Translate would work with. He mentioned 6 different language pairs. Imagine if you had to go watch the audio just to find where in that conversation he did that, right? Now imagine for a second that you could just look at the text and quickly do a search right on your browser. The amount of time that it would take you to scan that text is 1/10 perhaps of the time that it would take you to actually go watch that video again. Now, you would get higher quality output in the sense that you'd get to see the emotion that he expressed when he was thrilled about sharing that. But with a service like Transcribe, what you can do is you can get the best of both worlds. Where did they explain in Game of Thrones this particular sequence, right? The etymology of this stuff is explained right there. Well, can you just send me a link to it? Well, now you can, right? Where was this translation provided? Where was this term found? Where in this meeting did we discuss items A, B, and C? Now I can go do a search, right? Those are the kinds of things that this enables. Punctuation. It's not just for grandmas. It's really important to be able to read text, and it's not just from a comfort level, but actually to be able to understand that text, right? So let's read these 2 as examples. Please extrapolate the projections based on market growth and segment share. Can you email to me once you're done, right? Somewhere in there, we know that there's a request. We know as human beings that there is some punctuation missing. But it would take you a couple of seconds at the minimum to be able to discover those punctuations. Now, what the service can do is it can break that out and split the 2 into, please extrapolate the projections based on market growth and segment share. Can you email it to me once you're done, right? It's a very clean request. And anybody who reads that should be able to see that there's a request to do something and then email results when you're done. Now, this is even harder when the request is in fact being sent to another service, another machine, right? Because remember that what Amazon Transcribe is doing is it's allowing you to get text from audio and video data. What you do with that text is things like translation. And so with translation, you need to think about if the input or the source is not very good, then the output will not be very good either, right? And equally, if you think about services like Comprehend, right, or natural language processing in general, or for example, services like Lex, imagine if this was being sent to a bot to say, hey, bot, when you're done with this, can you do this other thing for me? Well, that would be very hard for a bot to decipher, right? So this is where punctuation is extremely important. The notion of speaker attribution. When 3 people are speaking in a conversation, when 10 people are speaking in a meeting, it's really important to be able to attribute the speech to the particular person. So you could see these 3 sentences. We are speaking with the customer tomorrow. What's our plan for the meeting? I have it covered as one big blob of text. Or you could see that, speaker 1, for example, said, we're speaking with a customer tomorrow. Somebody else piped up, what's our plan for the meeting? And somebody else says, I have it covered. Now, we all know from being in meetings like this that the person who said, I have it covered, is the person who gets tagged for it. So it's really important to find out who said that, right? The other thing that we can do is custom vocabulary, right? Now, this is a new feature. It's a really cool part of the service. And I have to tell you, working with some of the customers who work with, we won't call it jargon, but it's specialized language, right? This is a really important aspect. Customers who use brand names, customers who, for example, use technical terminology that is special to either the industry or, for example, to their particular use case, right? those customers find it really helpful to be able to provide those terms. And then behind the scenes, what the service does is it uses those extra phrases to be able to add auxiliary models so that what the service does generally is enhanced by the custom layer that you provided. So as an example, let's say that Amazon Transcribe is out and it does not know how to handle the utterance myocardial infarction, right? Well, you provide it some additional data. That data is used to additionally train the models, and then your particular instance, when you run that transcription job, can use these additional terms to be able to discover what was being said with the rest of the accuracy intact, right? Security is job 1 at AWS, and we've heard job 0 often, right? What we're talking about in this particular case is the security not just of your data in transit, at rest, but also of your use of the service, right? If you think about the fact that somebody hitting Amazon Translate or somebody hitting Amazon Transcribe under your account is essentially a billable event to that AWS account, you'd like to ensure that that data has been emitted with the right auspices as well as is charged for the right account. So as before, SSL, just to encrypt the content, the endpoints are all SSL for all AWS services today. But then the other thing that you also see is the use of IAM and SIG-v4 signing. What that does is encrypts the data upon between the two endpoints, and it also prevents, for example, replay attacks, right? You're also seeing signed URLs for transcripts. So for example, yes, the job is kicked off. Yes, it takes a few minutes to get done. When that transcription is available, who should be able to get to the data, right? That isn't a free-for-all. You'd like to limit that to a subset of people who have the right access, right? So what does a typical integration look like? There's an audio integration, right? There's some kind of audio input. That data is collected somewhere. And if you're lucky, it starts off on S3 using either Kinesis or the likes, right? Now, I say audio here, but it could be audio, it could be video as well. Some kind of Lambda or related function kicks off an Amazon Transcribe job. It waits on that job to finish. When that job is done, you then do some post-processing. Now, that post-processing might be enrichment in the sense you might say, I know these other facts that I want to bring into this. I know that with this particular audience, there's this Q&A set that was also made available. So from this analyst earnings call, I already have the manual transcription of the Q&A session, of the analyst discussion. So I'd just like to add that and then run comprehend on all of it together, right? So it's a really important aspect to be able to put these things together from different data sources and then to be able to make them available for historical analysis, right? So this is where the data that's in Transcribe just from this one MP4, MP3 file gets augmented with volumes of other information that you have and then goes on to enrich the existing data set that you own, right? So that's the important aspect there. And then using services like Amazon Athena for being able to rummage through a lot of this data to bring out those results for you, as well as Redshift for long-term data warehousing, or for example, Amazon QuickSight for being able to quickly visualize this information. So one of the things that would be really cool is to hear, for example, if you were looking at 1,000 recordings of call center, right? Imagine that you had a credit card operations and you were just trying to find out how many times do people call to report fraud, right? That's a typical challenge. And today the way that that would be done is you'd either have an off-the-shelf solution, or for example, you'd have been recording these tickets as they came in anyway, right? But without something along those lines, what you're trying to do is you're trying to say, if I can ask these questions informally, then what I've allowed my business teams to do is to ad hoc come up with projects for us, is to ad hoc ask questions about what we can do to improve the customer experience, right? So in that kind of a use case, what you would do is you'd transcribe the 8 kilohertz or telephony audio. You'd get the accuracy that you anticipate. You'd get the text into a data set that you can work with Amazon Comprehend or the likes of Comprehend. And then you'd visualize the results with QuickSight, right? It's a pretty typical thing I've actually seen a number of customers already do this and be quite successful. If you think about this other use case where I've got video content, right? And I'd just like to make that content available in Portuguese. I'd like to make that content available in Spanish, as an example. Now, this is something that is really easy to do, surprisingly easy to do with these services. Here's how you do it. You'd get the video content, you'd run that through Transcribe, you'd get the raw, so the raw output from Transcribe is JSON documents, right? And those JSON documents, as I said before, are have speaker labels for attribution of the speakers. They also have every word timestamped with a confidence score. Then you can take that content, take those sentence segments, run them through Transcribe. And then you've got a collection of these sentences that essentially make up the score, the transcript. Once you've got that, then you can reformat that data. It's a pretty simple operation to get into web VTT or a similar subtitle form. And now once you've done that in, say, 6 or 8 different languages, then you can simply host that content using either CloudFront or S3 or Elemental or one of the others that are supported in AWS to be able to all of a sudden take content that came in language A and make it available in several other languages with a short and automated workflow and process, right? What about meetings, right? Yoni signed up to say he had this thing covered, and we want to make sure that we've attributed that to him. The way that's typically done is, as before, the recordings come in, we transcribe those recordings, we index that text using Amazon Elasticsearch in this case, and then we have an API that runs through that, right? And then you can answer questions like, who said that we'd be able to get this done by the 20th? Who said that we were ready to do this? Well, now you have at least part of the conversation. It was said in the specific language that was used, right? Then the other question that often comes up is, all right, now that you've got that, can we identify if there are other things about this meeting, right? Can we identify this project that, for example, ran for 6 months when the team started to question whether they would be able to make it on time, right? Now, if you think about the typical Scrum session, this is hard to imagine. But take a second to think about those people who build structures, buildings, right? In those use cases, there's a project that has a longer life. And in those cases, there is a sense on the pulse of that team, right? How does the team feel? And I'm not saying that you can identify the specific feelings, but what you can identify is the tone of the conversation, right? You can use sentiment detection to say, how many sentences in this transcript seem to sound positive versus negative? You can have a sense of the kind of meeting that you just had with your customers as well, right? So how does this work? Behind the scenes, the audio that comes in goes through a pre-processing layer to make it available to deep learning models that, as I said before, are continuously trained, right? So it's not important where these models are today. What's really important is to accept the fact that they will continue to improve from wherever they are, right? Because many people have access to open source software and similar software that is today doing some of these things. But who will continue to maintain it? And who will continue to maintain it with the specific terms, for example, that you might want to use? That's where the likes of Transcribe come in. So after that process of going through the speech recognition, there's a post-processing, right? That post-processing is what enriches this, makes some corrections, for example, provides some of the timestamps, et cetera. Now, that's not where you have to stop, right? Because one of the important things is that the service might stop there, but you generally know more about your data than a service that was designed for general use does, right? So this is where it's important to use some of the existing data and be able to augment what comes out of the service to then say, what I got is a raw JSON file, but what I'm making out of it is a set of annotated subtitles. What I'm making out of it is an annotated transcript with links to parts of my documentation that others can actually use, right? So let's look at some of the challenges here, right? This is a great room. You guys have been quiet. You're actually listening, which is pretty awesome, so thank you for that. But that's not the way life works, right? Life is you sitting in a restaurant placing an order. Life is the person who called you to complain about the fact that the alarm doesn't turn off, has an alarm in the background. So ambient noise is a challenge, right? Conversational artifacts, things that come with compression, especially telephony audio has this sort of tinny or whiny metallic noise to it because it's heavily compressed data. You're taking something that is collected with something like 32K, and it is sampled all the way down to something like 8K, right? And that's if you're lucky. Good audio streams generally have something like 10 to 12K worth of data. And if you recall, with telephony, we actually sample telephony at a much lower rate so that we can support the compression that we'd like, right? Crosstalk. People, for some reason, feel like they can talk over each other, and they don't realize that there's a bot listening to them. No. What should really happen is, life doesn't consist of people speaking distinct sentences, right? We'd love that, but that's not how life works. So that's another challenge. Code switching. People speak in different tones when they speak about things, and they also switch language when they're doing that, right? If you've ever worked across functions, that's something that you're very familiar with. But what I'd love to be able to do is to show you a little more about this in the sense that a transcript that could then show you how a high accuracy transcript could get augmented with entity detection as well as with key phrases and sentiment to say, hey, here's somebody who's really happy with this upgrade that we provided. Here's how you could go about using it. Go to the console. You could also use the command line, which we'd highly recommend because it's faster. Pricing. If you do the math on that, you'll see that, and we have some examples on the pricing page, you'll see that just about an hour worth of video will cost you something like $1.44. There's a generous free tier for you to start with, so if you're playing with the service, you shouldn't see a bill for that. And how do you get started? Well, Amazon.com/transcribe. So what I'd love to do is to get Tony on to talk a little bit about how they were able to use the service. And thank you, Tony.
Is this working?
Oh.
You have the clicker?
Yes, sir.
Awesome.
What, you want a clicker too now?
Multitasking. I'm Italian. I speak with my hands. Change that. First, I'm Tony Abadi. I'm the founder of Echo 360. It's a 10-year-old software company that sells to colleges globally. So we're really basically a learning platform, and we're really, really excited about this basic feature because it's really going to change the paradigm for not only students but teachers, and we really believe it's going to improve outcomes in higher ed, which is pretty important to us. What the solution does today, before we get to the specifics on how Transcribe is going to supercharge this, is it's effectively a learning platform students use before, during, and after class. So it allows you to do a bunch of things. One, you can review the material projected to you before class in video format, audio format, or PDF. It also provides you a ton of tools that you can use with that content before class, during class, and after class. For example, you can take notes in our system, and I'll talk about why that's important in a second. You can also ask questions of your peers. You can ask questions of the TA. You can ask questions of the teacher on the fly with the system. Right? You don't have to raise your hand. You don't have to scramble to the podium after class. You don't have to go to teacher's hours. When you have the question at the moment in time, you can type the question and typically get an answer back much faster this way. The third thing it allows teachers to do is to actually poll or quiz students. So there's an interactive component to this too, which drives greater student engagement. This is just an example of a class. I'll use this particular class throughout the presentation. It's actually a professor at the University of Michigan who works with us. He is an extreme weather guy. He actually chases tornadoes, if you can believe it. So he has a pretty interesting, if not dangerous, job. And he uses this to teach his class and has been using it for quite some time. What you see effectively in the pane here is the Q&A window when a student wants to ask a question about some complex subject just presented. Right? So you can use this. Again, like I said, before class, you can use it in class, and you can, of course, use it after class. This also renders on your mobile device, so you don't have to do this with a PC. So that's a quick overview of what Echo does. Why is it important? Even before we add transcription, we have proven time and time again that when students use the solution, they get better grades. Now, this is a correlation, it's not causation. You can never truly prove causation. But this is actually a fairly sophisticated medical school example across 2 different courses where they tested the level of effort that the students were exercising the tool and/or the instructor was using the polling application of the tool. And you can see the more it's used, your grades go up demonstrably. So kids typically who fail or withdraw stay in the class. Kids who get Ds typically get Cs or C pluses and all the way up. So it's a pretty powerful tool as it exists today. So let's talk a little bit about how Transcribe is going to help. As mentioned previously, we are recording about 1 million hours of fresh learning content a year across our 250 customers in 30 countries. We're supporting about 2 million students now. So a lot of that video is just basically going into a library, and students are having to try and find things within a lecture. It turns out lectures are now running anywhere from as short as 45 minutes to upwards of 3 hours. So you get a 3-hour lecture and a video, and yes, in our system you can play it back at twice the speed. It's very hard to find what you need within the video, right? Unless you've been very good at diligently, while you're listening to the lecture live, bookmarking key areas and taking key notes. So what we're effectively going to do, and we're going to do this for free to a certain level for most schools, and then they can buy extra, is we're going to take that 1 million hours of content and transcribe it so that you literally have a full-blown transcript of what was spoken in the class after class, and we're going to present it to you in a window like the question window or the notes window. So why is this very helpful to the student? It's actually a bunch of things. First, we are taking the most advanced transcription engine that we have found, and we have tested a bunch in the market. And we believe even with the complexity of the language being used in STEM classes or in medical school where they have their own lingo and they have their own acronyms, we typically get between 88 and 94% accuracy before we can seed the engine with keywords, right? So we believe that that accuracy is going to go up. The second is we're fully integrating the suite into the other tools that already existed. So imagine a student in class, or more importantly after class in this case, toggling between their notes pane, the transcription pane, and the Q&A pane, right? Well, the first thing the student typically does, and we've done this with a few, is they don't take as many notes and they spend more time actually trying to engage in the content and learn. They're not trying to be the court stenographer in the classroom and take down everything the professor said. Why? Because they know it's going to be there for them by us, right? So now they can actually try and learn the material as opposed to write really, really fast, so they don't focus on that. The second thing it does is it allows them to find things. So over the course of several courses that you take in a semester, you could have upwards of 300 or 400 videos that you're responsible for trying to internalize before a final exam, if you're taking 4 courses a semester, which is typical in North America. This allows you to use keyword search to find key concepts that you want to basically review before the exam across all the files in your library, and then ultimately within a file. So again, if you have a 3-hour lecture and you're trying to find Bernoulli's principle in it, this thing is going to tell you specifically in what minute and second across that 3-hour video that phrase is used. And then when you slave to it, what's interesting is you go to that, let's assume it's at 45 minutes in an hour and a half or 2-hour-long lecture, up pops the video, the audio, the transcript, and your notes in any question and answer session that took place amongst all the students in the class right there at your fingertips, right? So you don't have to go searching through your handwritten notes. You don't have to go through a different Q&A threads in some other system. Everything's sitting there for you to internalize. And that's the reason why you see students' outcomes improving over time, right? So the other thing I would like to highlight is one of the key elements in higher ed is the notion that you need to have closed captioning for the hearing impaired. This is an ADA requirement. It's a legal requirement. The challenge here is it has to be 99% accurate or it does not qualify. And we are actually putting the transcription pane in the transcription window to the right, not the closed captioning window at the bottom here, because of that accuracy issue. It's against the law for us to put the transcript in that lower box until it's 99% accurate. Before you had this solution, schools would have to literally pay a human translator upwards of $60 an hour to do the transcription. So do the math. We're doing 1 million hours a year. Times 60 is $60 million if you were going to do a closed captioning for every audio and video we capture. it's untenable. Schools will not do this. So typically our schools, before this solution was available, they would find the classes where they had a specific student that had the accommodation requirement. They raised their hand and said, I am hearing impaired, please do this for me. And we typically see, depending upon the school, less than 5% of all of the video and audio transcribed the old-fashioned way because it is so expensive, right? But by providing this tool at, like I said, upwards of 90% accurate, ideally it would rise a bit with machine learning and seeding it with keywords, then what you can do is have work study students, much in the example we saw before, moving it from the 93, 94% accurate to the 99% accurate. Once it achieves that threshold, it can be put in the closed captioning window here, and that's something we do automatically. We've been doing that for years. So this is going to be a huge, huge tool for all schools to effectively close caption everything once they've cracked the accuracy code. Because we're not doing this at $60 an hour, I can promise you. Right? So, oh, I went the wrong way, excuse me. So again, just to summarize, the key thing here in all of this is we're driving student engagement. And I love this quote, you know, tell me and I forget, teach me and I learn, involve me, and teach me and I remember, and involve me and I learn. What we see students doing with this platform, to include with the transcription piece, is they use the solution time and time again. It becomes almost a crutch for them so that they can spend more time learning in class and then obviously using the tool to effectively really master key concepts after class. And so with the partnership with Amazon and with the transcription capability, we're highly confident that this is really even going to drive this even further. And with that, I think they asked me to encourage you all to please fill out the survey at the end of the session. Any questions? Thanks.